Joining me on the set is our Oliver Ferry from our International Affairs Desk. Hello to you, Oliver. If we look at Donald Trump's strategy here, it's been tough to pin down since the war began. We're in its second week now. We've heard various statements from administration officials. At first saying recently that it might last 3 to 4 weeks, now saying it might be open-ended until the objectives are met. How long do you think this war is going to last?
Well, it's anybody's guess, really. Donald Trump has been given conflicting time scales over the last week. He's initially said it would be 3 to 4 weeks. Now they're talking about several months, and there's no end game. The Trump administration clearly imagined that it would be a quick and easy win. The Iranian security chief Ali Larijani scoffed at that earlier this weekend by saying that they thought it would be like Venezuela. They could just simply go in and change the regime and get out very quickly. And it's clearly not like that, even though they did kill the Iranian Supreme leader Ali Khamenei and a large number of other leaders on the very first day. The Donald Trump hasn't ruled out sending in troops, but he seems to be very much improvising, making things up as he goes along. It has not been as easy as they expected, but this was probably predicted early on, and the Trump administration was made aware of this. The Washington Post reported on Saturday that a National Intelligence Council report conducted a week before the war concluded that a war was unlikely to oust the Islamic regime, and we're even hearing the Republican Guard or the Revolutionary Guard in Iran yesterday said that they can actually hold out for 6 months at least in a war. So the Islamic Republic is taking a heavy battering, definitely from these bombings, but they're not being decimated in quite the way that Donald Trump claimed that they were yesterday.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there are questions at least being raised about the U.S.'s stockpile of weapons.
Yeah, the Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal said he's deeply concerned about Ukraine because he actually thinks that the U.S. is actually going through way too many weapons in the first week. And this will have a knock-on effect to anything supplies that the U.S. can actually give to Ukraine. And other members of Congress are actually concerned that it could leave the U.S. vulnerable to an attack by a third or fourth power, or even just being able to ramp up production again to get them on a secure keel. Now, Lockheed Martin on Friday agreed to quadruple munitions productions, and that was after their CEO and also the CEO of other arms producers such as Raytheon were actually summoned to the Oval Office more or less by Donald Trump. Now, this is another example of the lack of preparation for the U.S. war effort. The U.S. military command was boasting of hitting more targets in the first 24 hours of the war than in the opening days of the Iraq invasion of 2003, which really you begin to wonder, was that actually a very good idea?
Yeah, what are you looking at in terms of the wider international implications?
Well, China was said there, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, said that the war should never have happened. And China is clearly, it's a close ally of Iran. It is probably stands to suffer quite badly because it is the biggest importer of Iranian oil. But that doesn't necessarily mean that China or anybody else for that matter is going to get involved. But the effects will be the rising oil prices will be the most common effect. That will affect the Europe, Asia. It already is beginning to have a big impact in Asia, and it will probably ultimately affect the US as well, because it's not so much Iran, it's more it's the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf in general. The shipping has more or less it's not exactly down to a trickle, but it's greatly reduced ever since the war began last week. And Iran will probably use that as a strategy to wreak havoc on its neighbours. In an asymmetrical conflict, this is Iran's greatest weapon. Now, despite what Masoud Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, said at the weekend, that he was apologising for attacking his neighbours, that didn't go down very well with other factions within the regime. So it actually could be quite likely that they will step up these attacks on its neighbours again. That will disrupt the flows. There are implications also for Ukraine in all this too, because none of these wars exist in a vacuum. And going even further, it seems a little bit trivial to point it out, but the FIFA World Cup, which is being hosted in June and July by the United States, along with Mexico and Canada, is likely to be disrupted in some way as well. There probably won't be a massive boycott or anything like that, but Iran is one of the countries involved. It was one of the first countries to qualify, and we've had an unprecedented situation where a host country has bombed one of the countries taking part. So it's quite likely that Iran, if this persists, will not be taking part in that World Cup.
All right, Oliver. Thank you very much, Oliver Ferry from our International Affairs Desk, and picking up on what